All right, good morning again. It's Brother Darren picking up on part two between the conversation and debate between Bart Ehrman and Justin Bass. Did Jesus of Nazareth rise from the dead? So, in my previous part, I'd covered um, the Marian apparitions and the Spanish conquest of the Aztec Empire. And the reason why I mentioned this was because Bart Ehrman, I nearly called him Bart Simpson. Bart Ehrman made a false equivocation or tried to ask Justin Bass as to whether, as a Protestant, he didn't believe in the Marian apparitions, which he's trying to almost say, well, things are like for like. How can we almost trust anything out here? So I'd mentioned about the Spanish conquest of the Aztec Empire and Our Lady of Guadalupe, and we're going to continue on from that. So, so this was Our Lady of Guadalupe is a really well known in Mexico, Mexican Marian apparition, and it says Our Lady of Guadalupe, also known as the Virgin of Guadalupe, is a Catholic title of Mary, Mother of Jesus, associated with a series of 5 Marian apparitions, which are believed to have occurred in December 1531, and a venerated image on a cloak enshrined within the Basilica of Our Lady of Guadalupe in Mexico City. The basilica is the most visited Catholic shrine in the world and the world's third most visited sacred site. So I want to have a look at some numbers in relation to this Marian apparition, which once again I'm saying is false. It's not of true Christianity. Mary was never empowered in that way to just make random appearances all over the world, with sometimes Jesus being seen as a baby or inferior to her, or um, sort of juxtaposed alongside her uh, in Catholic tradition. You know, you can pray to Mary, pray to the saints, although apologists for Catholicism or ecumenical Christians will try to make all sorts of excuses about all of this. But so this is from CatholicFaithStore.com, from their Daily Bread, and it's the grand conversion story of Our Lady of Guadalupe. So I'm going to read a little bit from out of this, and what it says is of Our Lady of Guadalupe appeared to Juan Diego in 1531. During that same period, the Reformation was taking hold in Europe, and thousands of people were deserting the Catholic Church to follow new ideas. Meanwhile, in Mexico, the opposite was soon to be true. Now, that's really interesting. That not long after the printing press has come out, and people can eventually start and getting Bibles in their own hands, and the Catholic Church or the church in particular, is undergoing the Reformation. The most visited shrine in the world from a Catholic perspective eventually pops up in Mexico. But anyway, let's continue. Now, what's interesting here is, look at this. I didn't even see this before, but this apparition, Our Lady, appeared to a humble peasant who had no power to change anything. Mary's image speaks volumes to Juan Diego and to all the people of Mexico. Her brown skin and deferential posture said that she came for both the Aztec and Spanish people. She unites the two. She wears a black belt, meaning she's pregnant. Well, Jesus has already had Mary, unless you're going back and reading the scriptures for historical context for when Mary was pregnant. she should not really be appearing anywhere else in the world to be pregnant. That's a massive red flag, but let me go past that. So, in the pictographic language of the Aztecs, the image of Our Lady of Guadalupe communicated that the child of her womb is true royalty, and he's more powerful and important than other gods of the Aztecs. The amazing story of Our Lady of Guadalupe continues. By 1541, just 10 years after her appearance to Juan Diego, a historian of the time wrote that 9 million people in Mexico had converted to Catholicism in a non-bloody way. The people of an entire country were converted. They left behind their old gods and discovered the truth of the incarnation. Now, I'm not going to read any more from that. I want to move on to something else. But another important point to pick up from there is that it said that the conversion was in a non-bloody way. What the article's not telling you or referring back to, though, is the conquest of Mexico by the conquistadors, which was extremely bloody. And all that did was pave the way for this Marian apparition to then come in, once they'd been defeated militarily, to act in this, like I said, in this this demonic apparition, to um, these Mexicans. And when I say demonic, the reason why I say that, not that Mary, the Mother of Christ, is demonic at all, but these apparitions are not of God. Anyway, let's pick up from here. So here's an article on psmag.com. This is going to look at the conquistadors and what they did in Mexico. And this was entitled, Mexico asked Spain to apologize for its conquest, and Spain said no. We have a saying where I come from my part of the hood: bad man, no rob and give back. But anyway, so Mexico asked Spain to apologize for its conquest. Spain said no. The Spanish government rejected the Mexican president's demand, suggesting Spain's invasion of the Americas shouldn't be judged through our modern lens. So the president of Mexico, he announced he sent a formal letter to the King of Spain asking the monarch to acknowledge and apologize for Spain's conquest of Mexico. I'm going to move past that, but it says here, there were massacres and oppression, AMLO says on the video. The so-called conquest was fought with the sword and a cross. They built their churches on top of the temples. He then called on Spain to apologize for its role in the conquest and to ask for forgiveness from Mexico's indigenous peoples. Spain immediately rejected AMLO's demand for an apology. In a statement issued on Monday, the government of Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez wrote, let me come back to that. First of all, when it just comes to this conquest and indigenous natives being made subject to quote unquote what appears to be Christianity, that's not of God. It's ungodly. And we don't find Paul, who was the apostle to the Gentiles in the Bible, need to resort to any of this type of tactic. The Bible says in Mark chapter 16 that we're to go into the world and spread the gospel, and we're to love our neighbor as ourselves, and to love even your enemy. So there would have been and is no need ever historically to have used force, violence, or the sword. So those that did it, they were in error, and unless they repented before they died or come to some truth regarding that, they'll have to face their judgment. But yet again, if you read the book of Acts or the rest of the epistles of Paul, you'll never find that this is authorized or sanctioned by Paul or for Christianity to spread. So it says this down here. Though the Aztecs greeted Cortes, the conquistador, peacefully, he went on to besiege the city for 75 days, causing a famine that decimated the population. Cortes went on to level Tenochtitlan and began building the Spanish colonial seat that would become Mexico City. After seizing control of the Aztec Empire, the Spaniards quickly conquered the rest of what is modern day Mexico, establishing an iron fisted rule by 1525, seeking to extract gold and other resources from their new colony. The Spaniards created the encomienda system, which was in essence a way of organizing plantation style slavery to force indigenous people to labor in the mines and fields. For generations, indigenous people who survived the plague of European diseases worked as slaves, and the Spanish missionaries forced them to adopt Christianity and abandon many of their native customs. So, yet again, um, you know, my response is that was not Christian. You cannot truly force somebody to believe or to convert. You can't. All you can do is give them a message, give them what happened historically and spiritually through the death, the burial, and the resurrection of Jesus Christ and his atoning sacrifice. And an individual has to be left to contemplate that. So this force by the Spanish or their missionaries, the conquistadors, it's not of God. And the same thing essentially happened under the transatlantic slave trade to a degree. Apart from the difference there was that you had Protestants that were involved as well. Effectively, the English Protestant Church, the Church of England, was previously under papal jurisdiction until Henry VIII broke away from the papacy. So all they basically did is they built on the same template, and none of that was of God. But it took for, it's taken for the printing press to come out, for people to receive that literature, for people to receive, sorry, that's the literature for the abolitionists, that enabled them to produce pamphlets and tracts showing the misery and the dreadful conditions that slaves were stored in, or yes, slaves were stored in on the slave ships. But also, it took for Bibles and English Bibles to get in our hands for us to be able to study these Bibles for ourselves to see whether, I guess, the doctrines and the policy of the Catholic Church in line with the state or Protestant churches have always been right. And in many cases, historically, we've now found out that that was not so. So I'm going to move on to something else now. It's another Catholic apparition, or Marian apparition, I should say. And it is called, beg your pardon, the article is Our Lady of Kibeho, the schoolgirls who warned of Rwanda's genocide. Now, this was on The Guardian, dated back to January 2019. But effectively, for those of you that know, there was a genocide in Rwanda in the 90s, and it killed up to nearly a million Africans. It was a war between the Hutus and the Tutsis, and this article is going to detail some of it. So anyway, this Marian apparition called Our Lady of Kibeho is supposed to have appeared to these three Rwandan girls, and we'll pick it up from here. So this Marian apparition has appeared to this young girl called Alphonsine. And she says, "Who are you?" Alphonsine asked. "I am the mother of the Word," replied the woman, whom Alphonsine immediately recognized as the Virgin Mary. Then she issued a terrible warning. Rwanda was going to become a hell on earth in a conflict that would see the picturesque rivers of Kibeho village run red with blood. It was the 28th of November 1981. Now, I'm going to say something here which is really out there, but if this Marian apparition appeared in 1981 before this genocide ensued, then this Marian apparition literally helped to bring about that genocide. In other words, spiritual, supernatural forces were working behind the scenes to enable all of this. For better context, read up on the Rwandan genocide. I haven't got the time to cover it fully. But it was 28th of November 1981, and when Alphonsine reported what she'd seen, her friends ridiculed her, teachers scolded her, and her village shunned her. But then another two students, Anna Farley and Mary Clare, the three, became known as the Trinity. They insisted they too had been visited by the Virgin Mary, and they gave the same apocalyptic warning. Rwanda, one of the most famine-prone regions of the world, one of the poorest countries, but it's so beautiful. And Kibeho is a small parish nestled in Mubaka. So inset there, we can see a picture of one of the Rwandans, the Tutsis. It was the ruling Hutu government that set out to sort of exterminate them, and they were sort of systematically sort of hunted down and, murdered, killed, terminated. I mean, I don't know if that's a machete chopping his head. It really looks dreadful. But it says, of course, we know now that a decade after the Trinity's terrible visions, Rwanda was riven by a terrible genocide. During 100 days in 1994, up to 1 million of Rwanda's population of just over 7 million were murdered by the ruling Hutu government in an attempt to exterminate the Tutsi tribe. Thousands of people were slaughtered in their churches, their decapitated bodies were dumped into rivers, colleagues, neighbors, friends, and even family members slaughtered one another. Kibeho itself suffered 2 massacres. Thousands of citizens were brutally killed in the parish church, and a year later, on the esplanade where the apparitions had taken place, most of the college's students were murdered. In 2001, after a 20-year investigation by the Vatican and 7 years after the genocide, the Pope certified the apparitions as authentic. Tens of thousands of pilgrims now travel to Kibeho each year in search of benediction. So, to add insult to injury, the papacy have certified that these apparitions are authentic. The apparitions are supposed to have begun in 1981, and they preceded, they were an omen to the genocide in 1994. They literally helped to build it. And this is from the Catholic Church. So when Bart Ehrman is referring back to, shouldn't effectively we consider these Marian apparitions as something to be equivocated to, the post-crucifixion resurrection appearances of Jesus? Absolutely not. It's all based on false doctrine, genocide, and that which is totally abominable. With that said, I'm going to finish off part 2 of this upload, and we'll pick up at part 3.